Hi everyone, and welcome to Certified Business Solutions YouTube channel. As the name suggests, Certified Business Solutions. Here we will be discussing business-related content with the main aim of trying to understand what causes successful business to be successful and what causes failed businesses to fail, with the aim of wanting to learn from the success cases so that we can implement those successful cases in our businesses and also avoid the failed cases from happening in our own businesses. I am your host, Dr. Alex Kamau, and today we'll be discussing about the rise and fall of NAKUMATT Supermarket. NAKUMATT Supermarket was started in 1987 by Atul Shah's family. By the peak of that business, in 2015, it was acknowledged by Forbes magazine that it had a solid business foundation. Actually, the CEO for that business, Atul Shah, was being equated to Dr. James Mwangi of Equity and also to Aliko Dangote of Nigeria. That time, NAKUMATT Supermarket had more than 62 branches spread across the Eastern African region. Some were in Kenya, where the headquarters for the business was, others in Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda. At that time, they had a sales of more than 50 billion Kenya shillings per year. And the number of employees were 6,000 employees. By no any standard could someone say that NAKUMATT was a small business. But now the million-dollar question is, why did NAKUMATT fail, even after having a very conducive environment for it to succeed? Good corporate image, brand image, strong financial muscle, good presence across the Eastern African region. It had all the ingredients of a successful business. But now the question is, the million-dollar question is, why did NAKUMATT Supermarket fail? Two causes, and several causes, but I will divide them into categories. One, internal causes, and two, external causes. Internal causes. Number one, expansion strategy that was instigated by NAKUMATT Supermarket. By 2010, NAKUMATT Supermarket had 32 branches, and these 32 branches have been acquired and formed within a period of 23 years. From 1987 to 2010, they had 32 branches. You will be shocked to know that in the next 5 years, from 2010 to 2016, they had acquired and created 30 more branches. They had doubled their number of branches from 32 to 62. Now the question is, how did NAKUMATT finance that expansion? Because actually it was noted that each branch would cost NAKUMATT 300 million to set up and to equip. So the question is, how did that happen? And that's where mistake number one by Equity happened, because it funded its expansion using working capital. Working capital is the money or a part of capital that is used to run day-to-day operations of an organization. Working capital is the money that is supposed to pay suppliers. Working capital is the money that is supposed to pay wages and salaries. Working capital is the one that is supposed to pay for inventory purchase, it's supposed to pay for taxes, it's supposed to pay for rent. But now, something happened. NAKUMATT decided to use working capital to fund for its long-term projects. Supermarkets as a business model is a bit strange because they acquire their inventory on credit, and sometimes they push credit for 30 days, 60 days, or even 90 days. They agree with their suppliers that they be supplied with commodities, goods, only for them to be able to make the payment after 90 days. But the consumers, the customers of supermarkets, they pay on a cash basis. So the management of a supermarket is likely to think that they are so liquid, they have so much money at their disposal, forgetting this is money that they owe to their suppliers. So mistake number one, they financed their expansion using working capital. Mistake number two that NAKUMATT supermarket did is acquiring the minority shareholding of the former MP for Kilome, Harun Mwau, using working capital. At that time, Harun Mwau had been named by the US government as one of the drugs kingpin. And NAKUMATT feared that since the assets of Mwau had been frozen at US, they thought that even the assets for NAKUMATT would be frozen by the US government, or even the adverse image and reputation that was surrounding one of its directors, Harun Mwau, would also affect the corporate image of NAKUMATT. So what did Atul Shah family did? They quickly bought out the shares that were owned by Harun Mwau. And it was not a small investment, because by that time, Mwau owned about 7.7% of NAKUMATT's shareholding. And at that time, NAKUMATT was valued at about 50 billion. So if you ask 7.7% of 50 billion, it's more than 3 billion. So NAKUMATT bought out the shares of Harun Mwau of about 3 billion. But now the question is, where did NAKUMATT get that money? Your guess is as good as mine. They used working capital. And from that time, the company started to struggle to pay suppliers, to pay rent, to pay salaries, even to pay taxes. And that marked the beginning of a downfall of one giant retail company that had dominated the entire Eastern African region for many years. Those are the internal factors. Let's go to external factors. External factors, they are macro factors, sometimes referred to macroeconomic factors, factors that are not within the control of an entity. Number one, at that time, the government decided to expand Thika Road. And through the construction of Thika Superhighway, one of the stores, one of the supermarkets of NAKUMATT that was at Roasters was demolished on 1st November 2008. NAKUMATT administration would say they were never warned by the government. They just woke up one day and the government tractors had impounded and had demolished the entire supermarket. They didn't have a chance to salvage any goods. All the stock that were there, even the money for the sales that were done the previous day, were gone. They were entirely demolished. Going by the statistics that NAKUMATT would use about 300 million to set up and stock one branch. It means that fateful day, 1st November, NAKUMATT lost 300 million at a go. A year later, a NAKUMATT downtown, a NAKUMATT branch, which was called and known as NAKUMATT Downtown, which was situated along Kimathi Street in a building called Woolworths Building. In 2009, it caught fire and the entire building and the entire business for NAKUMATT was burnt down. The fire had been started by a transformer which was in the neighborhood and sparked fire within NAKUMATT stores. And because of the gas cylinders that were there, the mattresses, the blankets, the fire spread very quickly. It was very unfortunate that some people lost their lives, and NAKUMATT lost everything they had in that store. We got to 2013. Another fate happened on one of the stores owned by NAKUMATT. It was the Westgate massacre. Al-Shabaab in 2013, they invaded one of the shopping malls in Kenya, that is Westgate, and the anchor tenant for Westgate was NAKUMATT Mall, NAKUMATT Supermarket. And that made NAKUMATT to close shop indefinitely, because as the government was investigating on how that innovation was done, all the businesses in that mall had to stop operating. And that affected NAKUMATT in a big way. Fast track to a number of years, around 2017, 2018, another fate happened on NAKUMATT. The building that housed and accommodated NAKUMATT UK, that was situated a few meters from Westgate Mall, was demolished. The reason it was demolished, the government said that that building was done on top of a riparian land and that it was interfering with the flow of rainwater. So those were the internal factors and external factors that caused NAKUMATT to come down. NAKUMATT could not withstand that force. Now the question is, did NAKUMATT try to salvage itself? Did it? That's $1 million question. Yes, of course, it tried. Which strategies did NAKUMATT use? And are they strategies that we can use today in our businesses to avoid failure? Let's discuss the same. Strategy number one that NAKUMATT did was to invoke a turnaround strategy. A turnaround strategy is a strategy by an organization to try to minimize losses, to try to reverse a negative trend about the company. If the company market share is reducing and shrinking, the company would want to reduce the cost of operation so that it can become more competitive in the market and hence reverse that negative trend. If the amount of sales are reducing, the company would want to do more marketing, research and development, advertising, so that again the sales can go up. So in this case, the turnaround strategy that was incorporated by NAKUMATT was the buying out of the estranged director, Harun Mwau. Because the image of Harun Mwau, after US had declared him as a drug kingpin, being part of NAKUMATT was making NAKUMATT image and corporate brand name to be tarnished. And therefore, the Atul family decided to buy out his shares. It was a good move because at that time, if NAKUMATT would have wanted to attract other investors to come and fund the business, they would not have agreed because they felt the effect of Harun Mwau inside that business would have been very catastrophic. So a turnaround strategy. They wanted to redeem the brand name for equity. So they actually bought out the shares for Harun Mwau. When that did not work, because after they bought the shares for Harun Mwau, they thought a strategic partner or investor would pump in money because Harun Mwau had a share of 7.7% in NAKUMATT fraternity, and they were targeting another strategic investor from Mauritius to buy 25% of the shareholding of NAKUMATT. That did not happen. But at least NAKUMATT had tried. Number two, after that failed, they went for divestiture strategy. Divestiture strategy is whereby a big incorporation tries to cut and scale down its operations. In this case, NAKUMATT did away with the branches that it thought were not profitable. Some branches were in Uganda, some in Rwanda, some in Tanzania, some here in Kenya. And that process of reducing the number of branches was considered to reduce the operating expenses of NAKUMATT by about 1.5 billion in a year. And that was a good move because when things get tough, the company does not continue with expansion program or a profitability motive, but it starts fighting for survival. And that's what NAKUMATT was doing. Again, it was not a bad move, but it was too late. It was a good move that was done a bit too late. And the company had no choice but to go to the last stage of retrenchment, which is liquidation. In 2018, the suppliers who are owed so much by the company sued for liquidation of the company. And that is how the story of NAKUMATT ended. Very unfortunate it's a corporation that had a lot of strength, a lot of future, a lot of potential, but it had to go down. The story ended there. But us, we don't end the story there. We go further than that. We want to know what else or how better would have NAKUMATT navigated the challenges that it was facing. Number one, issues of corporate governance. When a company grows from a startup to a mature company of the magnitude of NAKUMATT by that time, it requires to separate ownership and management. Remember, NAKUMATT was started in 1987 as a small shop, equivalent of a kiosk. Now it has grown to have many branches and a regional presence in Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, and Tanzania. This man who started it, there's no place we have heard that he went for further knowledge, for further training, for further human development in terms of acquisition of knowledge and skills. He did not. So his capability, management capability, and leadership ability was in question. And that's why when a company grows, it needs to separate ownership and management, like Safaricom has done. If you own a share of Safaricom, you are an owner, but you are not a manager. The company has had Peter Ndegwa. Previously, it had hired Bob Collymore, because these are people who had previous experience of managing multinational corporations, maybe at Amazon, maybe at Carrefour, maybe at other international brands, including something like Apple. That's the management that NAKUMATT Supermarket would have brought on board. So issues of corporate governance, they did not do separation of ownership and management. Number two, funding. When funding and raising capital for expansion, like the one that they did between 2010 and 2016, when they moved from 32 branches to 62 branches, they should not have funded that expansion using short-term capital, because they used working capital, and working capital is short-term capital. What they should have done is they should have used long-term capital to finance long-term projects. Remember, expansion of a business by creating more branches to the magnitude of 300 million per branch, that investment will not flow back to the entity very soon. It will take time. Even 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, that's when the company will start enjoying the fruits of that investment. But if you have gone to the bank, for instance, a different case, we say that you want to build rental units. You want to purchase a piece of land and then construct buildings, structures to rent out. So you go to the bank and you borrow 10 million, and you tell the bank, I will repay this 10 million within 1 year. Within 1 year. Now, you go buy a piece of land, you start constructing. By the time actually you are finishing to construct, the bank needs its money, the 10 million. Will you be able to provide that money to the bank? Of course not, because there was a mismatch. There was a mismatch between the source of fund and the purpose for that fund. For you to construct, for you to fund that kind of a venture, where you need to buy a piece of land and to construct a building for rentals, you need to negotiate a loan term of about 25 years, so that you will be paying slowly as you also continue to receive income from the business enterprise that you have created. So in this case, NAKUMATT used working capital instead of raising long-term capital, either from venture capitalists or from the securities exchange. At that time, remember, in 2015, NAKUMATT had a very good chance of raising an IPO, an initial public offer, because the brand name was very strong, the financial strength was very strong, the corporate image was very good, but there was a problem with the Atul Shah family. They did not want to dilute ownership of that company. They wanted to be the owners. And by doing that, they missed that opportunity. Instead of rolling out the buying of shares, they decided to go for borrowed money. They decided to go to the banks to ask banks to fund them. And the difference between using debt and equity is that debt does not dilute ownership. The owners, the shareholders, still retain the ownership of the company. Because with the anticipation of when the business grows, when the business stabilizes, then they will be able to repay the money that they had borrowed and still retain ownership. So that's the strategy that the owners of NAKUMATT decided to go for. But they should have gone for equity. Because equity holders, equity owners, they don't demand for any form of compensation if the business is not being profitable. The company does not have to pay them anything. So NAKUMATT, if it had floated shares, it would have, for instance, if it floated shares and it raised about 50 billion from the general public, that money would not have been subject to any interest, and no one would have required them to pay that money as long as the company was not doing well. Any person who would have invested in NAKUMATT share would have been free to sell them through securities exchange. So the kind of strategy that NAKUMATT used was wrong when they were doing their expansion. Number two, the kind of money that they used again to buy out the shares of the Harun Mwau, they used working capital. Again, they should not have done that. They should have asked a business angel or a venture capitalist to come and buy out the shares of Harun Mwau, instead of the business going back to its pockets and using working capital to buy out the shares of Harun Mwau. Because after that happened, that's when the company started on a downward spiral. Are there lessons we can learn from the case study of NAKUMATT? Yes. Number one, there is no company that is too big to fail. Remember, NAKUMATT would have sales of more than 50 billion a year, Kenya shillings. They had more than 6,000 employees. Their physical presence was felt in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda. They were even being recognized by Forbes magazine. But despite that, because of poor management, they failed. Lesson number two that we learn from that story and case study of NAKUMATT is that you don't finance long-term projects using short-term capital. And in this case, you don't finance expansion of your business using the working capital. Working capital is supposed to pay for suppliers, to pay salaries, the rent, and other short-term expenses. I hope you have learned something, and thank you very much for your time. If you are yet to subscribe to our YouTube channel, please do so that you don't miss subsequent videos that will be rolling out. Thank you.